Zethkar the Destroyer stood 8 feet tall on his 6 powerful legs, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming black under the harsh lights of the mercenary station. Scars crisscrossed his carapace like a roadmap of violence, each one a story of survival against impossible odds. His 4 arms ended in razor-sharp claws that had torn through countless enemies across 17 different star systems. The other mercenaries gave him wide berth as he walked through the cantina, their various alien forms shrinking back instinctively. For 12 standard cycles, Zethkar had held the undisputed title of the galaxy's most feared mercenary. His kill count exceeded 3,000 confirmed eliminations, ranging from lowly pirates to planetary warlords. The Galactic Mercenary Guild had ranked him Omega Class, the highest possible rating reserved for those capable of single-handedly taking down entire military installations. His reputation preceded him wherever he went, whispered in hushed tones across 100 worlds. The cantina fell silent as he approached the job board, its holographic display flickering with dozens of contracts. Most were standard fare, protection details, elimination targets, cargo escorts through dangerous space. But one caught his compound eyes, glowing red to indicate maximum difficulty and corresponding payment. The client was listed as anonymous, but the target description made his mandibles click with interest. Elimination of human operative designated Marcus Chun. Last known location, mining colony Zerian 7. Warning, target has military background. Payment, 500,000 credits. Zethkar's thorax rumbled with what passed for laughter among his species. Humans were a relatively new addition to the galactic community, having only achieved faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. They were considered primitive by most standards, soft, pink creatures with no natural weapons, no exoskeleton, no enhanced senses. The fact that someone was paying 500,000 credits to eliminate a single human was almost insulting to his professional reputation. He accepted the contract with a swipe of his claw across the scanner, transmitting his biometric signature to the Guild's central database. The details populated on his personal display. Marcus Chun, age 34 standard years, former soldier in something called the Human Colonial Marine Corps, currently operating as a freelance security consultant. The attached image showed an unremarkable biped with brown fur on his head and dark eyes that seemed oddly alert for such a primitive species. Other mercenaries had gathered around, drawn by the red glow of the high-value contract. Vraktul, a purple-skinned Zentorian assassin known for his stealth kills, stepped forward with his characteristic sneer. A human target, Zethkar? Surely you're not so desperate for credits that you'll take such easy prey. I could eliminate this Marcus Chun with my eyes closed during my sleep cycle. More laughter rippled through the crowd. Humans were considered the galaxy's newest joke, a species so physically weak that even the merchant-class plebeians could overpower them in hand-to-hand combat. Their ships were crude, their technology borrowed or adapted from other species, their military tactics laughably simplistic. Zethkar's reputation, however, was built on thoroughness. As other mercenaries mocked the easy payday, he retreated to his private quarters aboard his ship, the Bone Harvester, to study his prey. He pulled up everything available in the galactic databases about humans and their military forces. The reports were contradictory and confusing. Humans had no natural armor, yet they had somehow survived on a death world with massive predators. They possessed no enhanced physical capabilities, yet their soldiers regularly carried equipment loads that would strain species twice their size. Their reflexes were considered average, yet their pilots had somehow held their own against the technologically superior Kethran Empire in several border skirmishes. One particular report caught his attention. A military analysis from the Altarian Defense Force describing a human unit's actions during the Kepler Station incident. According to the report, 30 human soldiers had held off a force of 300 Kethran warriors for 6 days straight, inflicting casualty ratios that the Altarian analysts had dismissed as clerical errors. The Kethran were no joke, 7-foot-tall reptilian warriors with natural weapons and centuries of military tradition. Zethkar dismissed the report as propaganda. Every species inflated their military achievements to seem more threatening to potential enemies. He had fought Kethran before and found them competent, but not exceptional. If humans could really achieve such results, they would not be relegated to the galactic backwater colonies they currently occupied. The journey to Zirion 7 took 3 standard days through hyperspace. Zethkar used the time to plan his approach, studying the colony's layout and security systems. Zirion 7 was a typical mining operation, a few thousand inhabitants extracting rare Earth elements from a barely habitable rock orbiting a dying star. The human was reportedly providing security services to the colonial administration, probably nothing more than checking identification cards and breaking up bar fights. As the Bowen Harvester dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zirion system, Zethkar felt the familiar pre-hunt excitement coursing through his nervous system. His species had evolved as apex predators on a world where hesitation meant death, and that hunting instinct had served him well throughout his mercenary career. He began the mental preparation rituals that had kept him alive through countless contracts, visualizing the kill, planning for contingencies, sharpening his focus to a razor's edge. The mining colony appeared on his screens as a cluster of prefabricated structures connected by enclosed walkways. Atmosphere processors worked continuously to maintain a breathable environment under the colony's protective dome. Ships came and went regularly, hauling raw materials to processing stations elsewhere in the system. Security appeared minimal, a few automated defense platforms that could barely stop determined pirates, let alone a professional like Zethkar. He docked at the commercial port without incident, his credentials identifying him as a freelance trader looking for rare mineral contracts. The human customs official who processed his entry barely looked up from his datapad, stamping the authorization with the bored efficiency of someone who had seen hundreds of similar arrivals. Zethkar noted the human's soft features, the pale skin that would offer no protection against claws or energy weapons, the distracted manner that spoke of a species unprepared for serious violence. The colony's main hub buzzed with activity as miners finished their shifts and headed to the recreation areas. Zethkar moved through the crowds, his imposing form drawing nervous glances but no real alarm. Most frontier colonies saw their share of exotic alien species, and his trader credentials would explain his presence to anyone who bothered to check. He located his target within an hour. Marcus Chun was exactly where the intelligence reports had placed him, making rounds through the commercial district, checking on the various businesses and vendors that catered to the mining crews. He wore a simple brown uniform with no obvious weapons, though Zethkar's enhanced senses detected the slight bulge that indicated a concealed sidearm. The human moved with purpose, but without the heightened awareness that Zethkar associated with dangerous opponents. Observing from a distance, Zethkar studied his prey's routine. Marcus Chun appeared to be exactly what his file claimed, a former soldier turned security guard, going through the motions of a job that required little more than showing up and looking official. He stopped to chat with miners, inspected the occasional cargo shipment, and filed reports on a handheld device with the mechanical precision of someone following established procedures. The human showed no signs of enhanced reflexes or combat awareness. When a freight loader backfired loudly behind him, Chun turned toward the sound like any civilian would, curious but not alarmed, taking several seconds to assess the situation. A trained warrior would have reacted instantly, seeking cover or identifying threats. This Marcus Chun simply looked, determined there was no danger, and continued his patrol. Zethkar began to feel insulted. Whoever had placed this contract was paying premium rates for what amounted to executing a civilian. His reputation had been built on challenging hunts, taking down opponents who could fight back, who could make him earn his victory. This human appeared to offer no more challenge than the average merchant or bureaucrat he occasionally eliminated for political clients. Still, professional pride demanded he complete the contract efficiently. Zethkar began planning his approach, identifying the optimal location and timing for a clean kill. The human's routine was predictable enough that he could set up an ambush at any number of locations. A simple assassination in the maintenance tunnels would leave the body undiscovered for hours, giving him time to collect his payment and leave the system before anyone realized what had happened. As the colony's artificial day cycle shifted to evening, Marcus Chun completed his patrol and headed toward what appeared to be his private quarters in the residential section. Zethkar followed at a distance, noting the route through less crowded corridors that would provide perfect opportunities for a quiet elimination. The human seemed completely unaware of being stalked, never looking back, never varying his path, never showing any of the paranoia that kept dangerous individuals alive in hostile territory. The residential section was quiet as the mining crews settled in for their sleep cycles. Zethkar moved through the shadows with the fluid grace that had made him legendary among his peers. His natural hunting instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution and dozens of successful contracts, guided him toward his prey with predatory certainty. Marcus Chen's quarters were located at the end of a maintenance corridor, isolated from the main residential areas. Perfect for Zethkar's purposes, no witnesses, multiple escape routes, and enough ambient noise from the life support systems to mask any sounds of struggle. He positioned himself in the shadows near the entrance, extending his claws and activating the personal shield generator that would protect him from any desperate counterattack. The human approached his door with the same casual pace he had maintained throughout his patrol, showing no awareness of the death waiting in the darkness. Zethkar tensed his powerful leg muscles, preparing to spring forward in the killing strike that had ended so many lives before. His target keyed in his access code and stepped toward the threshold, presenting the perfect opportunity for a spine-severing attack from behind. But as Zethkar launched himself forward, something impossible happened. Marcus Chun moved, not with the clumsy reaction time of a startled civilian, but with fluid precision that spoke of trained reflexes and combat experience. The human dropped into a defensive crouch, pivoted on his heel, and somehow managed to avoid the claws that should have opened his throat to the spine. Instead of panic or confusion, Marcus Chen's expression showed focused calm as he assessed his attacker. His hand moved to his concealed weapon with practiced efficiency, drawing and aiming in a single smooth motion that Zethkar had never seen from supposedly primitive humans. The energy pistol that appeared in Chen's grip was not standard colonial security equipment, but a military-grade weapon designed for killing armored opponents. Well, Marcus Chun said in perfectly calm Galactic standard, his weapon trained on Zethkar's center mass, I was wondering when someone would finally make a move. You're the third assassin this month, though I have to admit, you're definitely the most impressive. Zethkar felt something he had not experienced in years. Genuine surprise. His prey had not only detected his ambush, but had reacted with the kind of professional competence that suggested serious military training. The human stance, his weapon handling, his complete lack of fear in the face of a creature that outweighed him by 300 pounds. None of it matched the intelligence reports about human capabilities. You are Marcus Chun, Zethkar stated, his translator rendering his clicks and chittering into Galactic standard. Guilty as charged, and you're the famous Zethkar, the Destroyer. I have to say, your reputation is impressive, but your research could use some work. Marcus kept his weapon steady, but his finger remained outside the trigger guard, the mark of someone confident in his ability to engage if necessary. 3 previous assassination attempts suggest someone really wants me dead, and they're escalating their hiring practices. Who were the other assassins? Zethkar found himself asking, genuinely curious despite the tactical disadvantage he now faced. A Flebican poisoner who tried to contaminate my food supply. Decent technique, but he didn't account for human resistance to most common neurotoxins. Then, a Zentorian stealth specialist who thought he could take me in my sleep. Marcus gestured toward a barely visible stain on the corridor wall. That didn't go well for him either. Zethkar's compound eyes tracked to the stain, noting the distinctive purple coloration that could only come from Zentorian blood. If Marcus Chun had killed Vractal, and that stain suggested he had, then the human was far more dangerous than his file indicated. Zentorians were natural assassins, evolved for stealth kills, and known throughout the galaxy for their lethality. You kill Vractal? Zethkar asked, genuinely impressed despite himself. He made the same mistake you almost did, underestimating humans because we don't look particularly threatening. Your species judges capability by physical appearance, which is a fundamental tactical error when dealing with humans. Marcus Chin's weapon remained trained on Zethkar, but his posture suggested he was more interested in conversation than immediate violence. The humans seemed to be evaluating options, possibly looking for a way to resolve the situation without bloodshed. Such hesitation would normally be a weakness Zethkar could exploit, but something about Marcus Chin's controlled confidence suggested the human was operating from a position of strength rather than uncertainty. Your intelligence reports probably told you that humans are weak, slow, and technologically primitive, Marcus continued. Those reports are based on limited contact with human civilian populations. What they don't account for is that humans have been fighting wars for our entire evolutionary history. We've been killing each other with increasing efficiency for thousands of years before we ever left our homeworld. Zethkar found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. The creature before him moved like a trained killer, spoke like an experienced soldier, and had somehow neutralized two professional assassins without the local authorities even being aware of the attempts. Either Marcus Chun was an exceptional individual among his species, or human military capabilities had been severely underestimated by Galactic intelligence services. Why are you not attacking? Zethkar asked, genuinely puzzled. In his experience, prey that gained a momentary advantage pressed it immediately to ensure survival. Because killing you would create more problems than it solves, Marcus replied pragmatically. You're famous enough that your death would draw attention I don't need. More importantly, you seem intelligent enough to listen to reason, which puts you ahead of your two predecessors. The human was offering him a way out. In 12 years of mercenary work, Zethkar had never encountered a target who had gained the upper hand in a confrontation, but then offered to negotiate rather than eliminate the threat. It spoke to either supreme confidence or a fundamentally different approach to violence than he was accustomed to among galactic species. What do you propose? Zethkar asked, lowering his claws slightly to indicate willingness to communicate. Simple. You report back to whoever hired you that Marcus Chun is dead. Provide whatever evidence they require. There are ways to fake that sort of thing. You keep the contract payment. I continue my work here without further interruption, and we both benefit from the arrangement. It was a reasonable proposal, but it would require Zethkar to abandon a contract for the first time in his career. His reputation was built on completing every assignment, regardless of difficulty or complications. Failure to eliminate Marcus Chun would raise questions about his effectiveness, potentially damaging the fearsome reputation that commanded premium rates from clients across the galaxy. My reputation requires that I complete contracts, Zethkar explained. If word spreads that I failed to eliminate a single human, other targets will believe they can resist me. Marcus Chun nodded, as if he had expected this response. I understand the professional considerations. But consider this, if you persist in trying to kill me, one of two things will happen. Either you will succeed, which seems unlikely given how our encounter has gone so far, or I'll kill you in self-defense. Either outcome damages your reputation more than a staged death would. The logic was sound, but it ignored the fundamental nature of Zethkar's professional pride. He had built his career on being the apex predator of the mercenary world, the killer that other killers feared. Backing down from a contract, even for logical reasons, felt like a betrayal of everything that had made him successful. You believe you can kill me, Zethkar said, not quite making a question. I know I can kill you, Marcus replied with matter-of-fact certainty. The question is whether that's necessary. I'd prefer to resolve this without violence, but I'll do whatever is required to protect myself. The absolute confidence in a human's voice was unsettling. Zethkar had faced down everything from armored Kethran warriors to cybernetically enhanced Morgoth assassins, and none of them had spoken with such calm certainty about their ability to defeat him. Either Marcus Chun was bluffing with extraordinary skill, or he possessed capabilities that his species' reputation had not prepared Zethkar to expect. "How?" Zethkar asked. "How would you kill me?" Marcus Chin's slight smile held no humor, only professional assessment. "Your exoskeleton is impressive, but it has weak points at the joints where mobility requires flexibility. Your confidence comes from facing opponents who attack your strongest points, your armored shell, your claws, your reach advantage. Humans don't fight that way." Explain. "We're persistence hunters. We don't rely on single decisive strikes like most predator species. We wear down our prey over time, exploit weaknesses, adapt our tactics based on what we learn during the engagement. Your previous encounters have been with species that fight like you do, quick, decisive, relying on natural weapons and straightforward tactics." Marcus Chun shifted his stance slightly, and Zethkar noticed how the movement kept the human positioned near a maintenance panel that could provide cover while maintaining clear sight lines down the corridor. The positioning was subtle but tactically sophisticated, suggesting extensive training in close-quarters combat. Humans have been fighting armored opponents for millennia. We know how to find weak spots, how to use an opponent's size and strength against them, how to turn environmental factors to our advantage. Your exoskeleton makes you strong, but it also makes you heavy and limits your mobility in confined spaces. The assessment was accurate and demonstrated a level of tactical thinking that Zethkar had not expected from supposedly primitive humans. Marcus Chun had clearly studied his species' physiology and combat capabilities, identifying vulnerabilities that most opponents never recognized. It suggested preparation and intelligence gathering that went far beyond what a simple security guard should possess. "You are not what you appear to be," Zethkar observed. "None of us are," Marcus replied cryptically. "That's the mistake everyone makes about humans. We look soft and weak because we don't have natural armor or claws or enhanced physical capabilities. But we survive on a death world by being smarter, more adaptable, and more ruthless than anything that tried to eat us." The conversation was interrupted by footsteps echoing down the corridor, someone approaching from the main residential section. Marcus Chin's expression didn't change, but his weapon shifted slightly to maintain coverage of both Zethkar and the approaching sound. The movement was automatic, unconscious, the kind of threat assessment that became instinctive after extensive combat experience. A human female rounded the corner, stopping short when she saw the tableau of Marcus Chun holding an armed alien at gunpoint outside his quarters. Instead of panic or alarm, she simply sighed with the exasperation of someone dealing with a familiar inconvenience. "Another assassin?" she asked in the same tone someone might use to comment on bad weather. "Number 3 this month," Marcus confirmed without taking his eyes off Zethkar, though this one seems open to reasonable discussion. The female human was even less physically imposing than Marcus Chun, smaller and lighter with none of the obvious muscle development that might indicate combat training. Yet she showed no fear at finding herself in the middle of an armed confrontation, instead regarding Zethkar with the kind of professional interest a scientist might show when examining an interesting specimen. "Zethkar, the Destroyer," she said after a moment of study. "I read your file when we identified you entering the system. Impressive kill count, though your tactics are somewhat predictable. You rely too heavily on intimidation and overwhelming physical superiority." Zethkar felt his mandibles click with irritation. Being analyzed like a specimen was insulting enough, but having his professional methods criticized by a creature that could barely reach his thorax was genuinely infuriating. Yet something about the female's clinical assessment suggested she spoke from knowledge rather than bravado. "And you are?" he managed to ask through his translator's interpretation of his agitation. "Dr. Sarah Martinez, xenobiology specialist and tactical consultant." She moved closer with the same fearless confidence Marcus Chun had displayed, stopping just outside Zethkar's reach without any apparent concern for her safety. I've been studying alien physiology and combat techniques for the Colonial Defense Force. Your species presents some interesting challenges. The revelation that both humans were military personnel explained much about their behavior, but raised new questions about their presence on a remote mining colony. Colonial Defense Force units were elite formations, trained to handle threats that exceeded normal military capabilities. Their assignment to what appeared to be routine security work suggested hidden agendas or classified operations that his intelligence sources had failed to detect. "What are humans doing on Zirian 7? Zethkar asked, beginning to suspect that his contract was more complicated than it appeared. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances that suggested silent communication between partners who had worked together extensively. The brief interaction spoke to shared experiences and mutual trust that went beyond professional cooperation. Officially, providing security consultation to help the colony improve their defensive capabilities, Sarah replied. Unofficially, that's classified information that you don't have clearance to access. Someone wants us dead badly enough to hire progressively more expensive assassins, Marcus added, which suggests our work here is making someone nervous. The question is whether you're just taking contract for money or if you're part of a larger operation. Zethkar considered the implications. Professional assassins like himself were expensive, but ultimately just tools used by those with greater agendas. If someone was systematically targeting human military personnel with increasingly capable killers, it suggested a coordinated effort to eliminate whatever threat the humans represented. The escalating nature of the contracts, from a simple poisoner to a stealth specialist to himself, indicated growing desperation on the part of whoever wanted Marcus Chin dead. I work alone, Zethkar said truthfully. I accepted this contract because the payment was substantial, not because I have knowledge of larger operations. But you could help us identify who placed the contract, Sarah observed. Mercenary guild records would contain payment traces and client information that could lead us to whoever is orchestrating these assassination attempts. The suggestion that he cooperate with his intended targets was almost absurd, yet Zethkar found himself considering it seriously. His reputation was built on completing contracts, but it was also built on working with the most dangerous and sophisticated clients in the galaxy. If someone was using him as part of a larger operation without his knowledge, it represented a professional insult that demanded response. What would you offer in exchange for such cooperation? He asked, genuinely curious about what these humans might consider valuable enough to trade. Marcus Chen's slight smile suggested he had expected the question. Information. You've built your reputation fighting opponents who use predictable tactics and straightforward approaches to combat. But the galaxy is changing, and new threats are emerging that require different skills. Humans represent one of those new threats, Sarah added. Not because we're physically superior, we're not, but because we think about warfare differently than most species you've encountered. We could teach you techniques that would make you more effective against opponents who don't fit traditional patterns. The offer was intriguing. Zethkar's success had always depended on staying ahead of potential rivals by adapting new techniques and technologies. If humans possess combat knowledge that could give him advantages over other mercenaries, the information might be worth more than his current contract payment. Demonstrate, he said simply. Marcus Chun holstered his weapon in a smooth motion that spoke to complete confidence in his ability to redraw it faster than Zethkar could attack. The human then moved into an empty space in the corridor, gesturing for Zethkar to join him. Attack me, Marcus said calmly. Full strength, full speed. Don't worry about causing injury. Show me how you normally eliminate targets. Zethkar hesitated. Every instinct told him this was some kind of trap, that the seemingly defenseless human was baiting him into a vulnerable position. Yet professional curiosity overrode his caution. He wanted to understand how Marcus Chun had survived previous assassination attempts and spoken with such confidence about killing him. He launched himself forward with the same killing strike that had served him throughout his career, extending his claws and using his full weight and strength to overwhelm his target. The attack was perfectly executed, fast enough to catch even enhanced opponents off guard, powerful enough to tear through most personal armor systems. Marcus Chun moved like water, flowing away from the attack with minimal motion while simultaneously redirecting Zethkar's momentum. Instead of trying to stop or deflect the charge, the human used Zethkar's own strength against him, adding precise force at exactly the right angle to send him crashing into the corridor wall with bone-jarring impact. Before Zethkar could recover, he found Marcus Chun positioned behind him with some kind of human blade pressed against the weak joint where his exoskeleton connected his head to his thorax. The entire engagement had lasted less than 3 seconds, and Zethkar had been completely outmaneuvered by an opponent who weighed a third of what he did. Aikido, Marcus explained calmly, stepping back and sheathing the blade. A human martial art based on using an attacker's force against them. Instead of meeting strength with strength, we redirect energy and exploit momentum. Your charge became the instrument of your own defeat. Zethkar slowly picked himself up, his pride damaged more than his exoskeleton. In his entire career, he had never been so thoroughly and effortlessly defeated. The human had made it look simple, turning his greatest strength into a liability with techniques that had never appeared in any galactic combat manual. How many humans know these techniques? He asked, beginning to understand why someone might want to eliminate human military personnel before they could spread such knowledge. Every human soldier learns some form of martial arts, Sarah replied. We've been developing unarmed combat techniques for thousands of years, specifically to deal with opponents who are bigger and stronger than we are. What Marcus just showed you is basic training that any colonial marine would know. The implications were staggering. If every human soldier possessed these capabilities, they represented a threat to established military doctrines across the galaxy. Species that had relied on physical superiority for millennia would find their advantages neutralized by opponents who fought with completely different principles. This is why someone wants you eliminated, Zethkar realized. Partly, Marcus agreed. Humans are disrupting a lot of established assumptions about combat, technology, and galactic politics. Some entities would prefer to eliminate the disruption rather than adapt to new realities. Zethkar found himself facing a choice that would define the rest of his career. He could continue pursuing his contract, almost certainly resulting in his death at the hands of opponents who had already proven their superiority. He could abandon the contract, damaging his reputation, but preserving his life. Or he could explore the possibility of alliance with creatures who might offer him knowledge and opportunities that exceeded anything his current career path provided. The decision would reshape everything he thought he knew about strength, survival, and success in an increasingly complex galaxy. 3 days later, Zethkar found himself in a situation he had never imagined possible. Sitting across from his intended targets in their makeshift command center, studying intelligence reports and tactical assessments that revealed the scope of the conspiracy against them. The mining colony's administrative offices had been converted into something resembling a military intelligence operation, complete with encrypted communication arrays and analysis equipment that seemed far too sophisticated for routine security work. The transformation had begun when Zethkar made the decision to provide Marcus and Sarah with access to his mercenary guild contacts. What they discovered through those channels had shocked even him. A coordinated campaign involving multiple alien species, significant financial resources, and assassination contract that extended far beyond the 3 attempts on Marcus Chen's life. Someone was systematically targeting human military personnel throughout the outer colonies, using increasingly sophisticated methods to eliminate them before they could establish permanent defensive positions. 17 confirmed assassinations in the past 6 months, Sarah reported, highlighting locations on a holographic star map that showed the scope of the operation. All targets were Colonial Defense Force personnel assigned to remote outposts or advisory positions. The pattern suggests someone is trying to prevent humans from establishing a defensive network in this sector. Zethkar studied the data with professional interest, noting the escalation in methods and the geographic distribution of attacks. His experience with galactic criminal networks allowed him to identify patterns that the humans might have missed, payment routes that suggested coordination from the Kethran Empire, weapon signatures that pointed to specific mercenary groups, timing that indicated intelligence gathering from multiple sources. The Kethran are behind this, he concluded after analyzing the evidence. The payment structures match their military intelligence operations, and several of the weapons used in successful assassinations are exclusively manufactured in their territory. Marcus nodded grimly. We suspected as much, but we needed proof before taking action. The Kethran have been testing human military responses for months, probing our capabilities and looking for weaknesses they can exploit. What? Zethkar asked, genuinely puzzled by the strategic logic. Humans occupy a small number of colonies in sectors the Kethran have shown no previous interest in claiming. Sarah brought up another display showing mineral surveys and trade route analyses that revealed the economic motivations behind the conflict. Zirian, 7, and the other targeted colonies sit on rare earth deposits that are essential for manufacturing advanced starship components. More importantly, they control hyperspace routes that the Kethran need for expanding their territory toward the galactic core. The Kethran expected to intimidate human colonies into abandoning these positions through shows of force, Marcus added. When that didn't work, they began testing our military capabilities through proxy conflicts and limited engagements. What they discovered worried them enough to authorize systematic elimination of our personnel. Zethkar's compound eyes tracked the tactical displays with growing understanding. The Kethran Empire had built their expansion strategy on the assumption that newly spacefaring species could be easily dominated through superior technology and overwhelming force. Humans had proven resistant to such tactics, forcing the Kethran to reassess their approach and consider more drastic measures. What did they discover about human capabilities that worried them? He asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer based on his own recent experience. That we don't fight the way they expected, Sarah replied. Kethran military doctrine is based on honorable combat between equals, with established rules and predictable tactics. They couldn't understand how human forces were achieving disproportionate casualty ratios against superior numbers and technology. Marcus pulled up combat footage from the Kepler Station incident that Zethkar had read about during his initial research. Watching the actual engagement, rather than reading sanitized reports, revealed the full scope of how thoroughly human tactics had disrupted Kethran expectations. The humans hadn't tried to match their opponent's strength directly. Instead, they had used mobility, deception, and environmental factors to create situations where Kethran advantages became liabilities. Humans cheat, Marcus said with obvious pride. We use every possible advantage, ignore conventional rules of engagement, and adapt our tactics faster than our opponents can respond. The Kethran found this approach deeply disturbing because it challenged their entire understanding of how warfare should be conducted. Zethkar watched human soldiers use improvised explosives to collapse tunnel sections, trapping Kethran warriors in confined spaces where their size and armor became disadvantages. He saw them employ psychological warfare that exploited Kethran cultural assumptions about honor and courage. Most shocking was their willingness to accept casualties while inflicting disproportionate damage on their opponents, fighting with a persistence that bordered on fanatical. Your species is genuinely frightening, Zethkar admitted. Not because of individual capabilities, but because of your approach to conflict. You fight like prey animals that refuse to accept their position in the food chain. Exactly, Sarah agreed. And that terrifies predator species who have built their civilizations on the assumption that superior physical capabilities translate to military dominance. Humans prove that intelligence, adaptability, and sheer determination can overcome almost any physical disadvantage. The revelation explained much about the systematic campaign against human military personnel. The Kethran weren't just trying to claim territory. They were attempting to prevent the spread of military doctrines that could undermine their entire imperial structure. If other species learned human tactical approaches, the Kethran's traditional advantages would become meaningless. This creates opportunities, Zethkar observed, his mercenary instincts identifying potential profit in the changing galactic situation. If Kethran military supremacy is challenged, other species will need new approaches to defend themselves. There will be demand for training, consultation, and tactical assistance. Marcus and Sarah exchanged the same meaningful glance he had noticed during their first encounter, suggesting they had already considered these possibilities extensively. "That's where you come in," Marcus said carefully. "We need someone with your reputation and connections to help spread certain information throughout mercenary networks. Someone the Kethran would never suspect of working with humans." "What kind of information?" Sarah activated a new display showing detailed analyses of Kethran military weaknesses the human forces had identified during their conflicts. The data was extraordinarily detailed, covering everything from equipment vulnerabilities to predictable behavioral patterns that could be exploited by smaller, more mobile forces. Intelligence that could level the playing field for any species willing to adapt their tactics, she explained. The Kethran Empire has been expanding for centuries because nobody understood how to effectively counter their approaches. "We do." Zethkar studied the intelligence package with growing excitement. The information was worth more than any single assassination contract, potentially worth enough to establish him as an independent operator with clients throughout the galaxy. More importantly, it represented the kind of paradigm shift that created new opportunities for those positioned to take advantage of changing circumstances. "You want me to sell this information to other mercenaries," he realized. "We want you to make it available to anyone facing Kethran aggression," Marcus corrected. "Payment is secondary to ensuring the information reaches the right hands, though we're certainly willing to compensate you for your distribution efforts." The proposal was audacious in its scope and implications. Rather than simply defending human colonies, they were proposing to undermine Kethran military supremacy throughout their sphere of influence. It would transform the balance of power in multiple sectors and potentially destabilize the entire imperial structure. "The Kethran will respond violently once they realize what's happening," Zethkar warned. "They'll escalate beyond assassination attempts to direct military action." "Let them try," Sarah said with confidence that seemed entirely genuine rather than bravado. "Human colonies are better prepared for open warfare than they are for covert assassination campaigns. We've been planning for this possibility since the first probe attacks." Marcus brought up defensive preparations that revealed the true scope of human activities in the region. What had appeared to be simple mining colonies were actually fortified positions with concealed weapon systems, underground facilities, and defensive networks that could coordinate responses across multiple star systems. The Kethran had been so focused on eliminating individual targets that they had missed the larger strategic picture. "Every human colony in this sector is a potential fortress," Marcus explained. "We've been preparing defensive positions, stockpiling supplies, and training local populations for months. If the Kethran want a direct confrontation, they'll discover that conquering human territory is much more difficult than they anticipated." Zethkar found himself genuinely impressed by the scope and sophistication of human preparations. They had used their reputation for being primitive and non-threatening to conceal military preparations that would have impressed much more advanced civilizations. The deception was masterful in its simplicity. Nobody had looked for advanced defensive systems because humans weren't supposed to be capable of building them. "How many colonies are involved in this deception?" he asked. "All of them," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "Every human settlement beyond Earth's immediate sphere of influence is part of our defensive network. We learned early in our expansion that we couldn't rely on others for protection, so we built our own." The implications were staggering. Rather than scattered outposts vulnerable to intimidation or conquest, human colonies represented a coordinated military network that could support each other across interstellar distances. Any attempt to eliminate them would require resources and commitment that exceeded what the Kethran had demonstrated during previous expansion campaigns. This changes everything, Zethkar realized. The galactic balance of power will shift completely once this becomes known. That's the idea, Marcus agreed. Humans are tired of being dismissed as primitive newcomers who should be grateful for whatever scraps the established powers are willing to allow us. We're ready to claim our place as equals in galactic affairs. The transformation in Zethkar's understanding was complete. What had begun as a simple assassination contract had revealed a conflict that would reshape the entire galactic political structure. The humans weren't just defending their colonies. They were orchestrating a revolution that would challenge every assumption about strength, technology, and military supremacy that had defined interstellar relations for centuries. I accept your proposal, Zethkar announced formally. I will distribute your intelligence package to my contacts throughout the mercenary networks. But I want more than just payment for my services. What do you want? Sarah asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. Training. I want to learn human combat techniques, tactical approaches, and strategic thinking. If the galaxy is changing, I want to be ahead of the curve rather than struggling to catch up. Marcus smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Zethkar had seen from him. We were hoping you would ask. Training someone with your reputation and connections would be an excellent way to demonstrate human capabilities to the broader mercenary community. But understand, Sarah added seriously, once you start working with us, there's no going back to your old career. The Kethran will mark you as an enemy, and other species will view you with suspicion. You'll be burning bridges that can't be rebuilt. Zethkar considered this warning carefully. His reputation as the galaxy's deadliest independent mercenary had taken years to build and represented everything he had achieved since leaving his homeworld. Abandoning it would mean starting over completely, with no guarantee that his new path would prove more successful than his current one. But the alternative was clinging to approaches that were becoming obsolete in a rapidly changing galaxy. The humans had already proven that traditional advantages could be neutralized by superior tactics and strategic thinking. Rather than being left behind by galactic changes, he could position himself at the forefront of new developments. I've spent 12 years building a reputation based on old assumptions about strength and dominance, he said finally. Perhaps it is time to build a new reputation based on adaptation and intelligence. The decision marked the end of Zethkar's career as an independent assassin and the beginning of something entirely different. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Sarah introduced him to human military tactics that challenged every principle he had learned throughout his life. Where his species valued direct confrontation and overwhelming force, humans emphasized deception, mobility, and psychological warfare. Where galactic military doctrine focused on technological superiority, humans demonstrated the effectiveness of improvisation and resource management. The training was grueling in ways that physical combat had never been. Zethkar was forced to abandon instincts that had kept him alive for years, learning to think like prey animals that had evolved to outwit stronger predators. The humans taught him to value intelligence over strength, adaptability over tradition, and strategic patience over tactical aggression. Most challenging was learning to work as part of a team rather than as an independent operator. Human military doctrine emphasized coordination and mutual support, concepts that had no equivalent in his species' solitary hunting traditions. Yet he gradually came to understand how collective action could achieve results that exceeded the sum of individual capabilities. The transformation became complete during a simulated combat exercise where Zethkar found himself working with human marines to assault a fortified position. His instincts demanded a direct frontal assault that would overwhelm the defenders through superior firepower. Instead, the humans taught him to coordinate diversionary attacks, exploit environmental factors, and use timing to create opportunities for decisive action. When the exercise concluded successfully, Zethkar realized that he had learned more about warfare in 3 weeks than he had discovered during 12 years of independent operations. The humans had fundamentally altered his understanding of what constituted strength and effectiveness in combat situations. "Now you're beginning to think like a human," Marcus observed as they reviewed the exercise recordings. "Not because you've abandoned your physical advantages, but because you've learned to use them more intelligently. Your species truly is frightening," Zethkar replied with newfound respect. "Not because you're strong, but because you make everyone around you stronger as well." Sarah nodded approvingly. "That's the real secret of human military success. We don't just win battles. We change the nature of warfare itself. And now you're going to help us spread that change throughout the galaxy." The intelligence distribution operation began within days of Zethkar's training completion. Using his extensive network of mercenary contacts, he began disseminating carefully crafted packages of tactical information that revealed Kethran vulnerabilities without explicitly identifying their human origin. The information appeared to be standard mercenary intelligence, shared through normal channels that the Kethran had no reason to monitor closely. The response was immediate and dramatic. Mercenary units throughout the galaxy began reporting successful engagements against Kethran forces using tactics that had never appeared in standard military manuals. Space pirates discovered methods for defeating Kethran patrol ships that had previously been invulnerable to their attacks. Defense forces on contested worlds learned to counter Kethran ground assault tactics with techniques that turned Imperial advantages into liabilities. Within months, the Kethran Empire found itself facing challenges that their military doctrine had never anticipated. Their expansion campaigns began suffering unexpected casualties and strategic setbacks as opponents employed human-derived tactics to neutralize traditional Kethran advantages. The Empire's reputation for invincibility crumbled as news of their defeats spread through galactic communication networks. The Kethran response was predictably violent and indiscriminate. Unable to identify the source of the tactical intelligence that was undermining their operations, they began launching preemptive strikes against any species or organization they suspected of harboring anti-imperial sentiment. Their attacks only served to validate human warnings about Kethran intentions, driving more species to seek the tactical assistance that Zethkar and his growing network of contacts could provide. "The Empire is in its death throes," Zethkar reported during a secure communication with Marcus and Sarah. "They're lashing out randomly, making enemies faster than they can eliminate threats. Their military leadership has lost confidence in their traditional approaches, but they don't understand alternatives well enough to adapt effectively." "How long before they trace the intelligence leaks back to us?" Sarah asked pragmatically. "Perhaps another month, possibly 2. Their intelligence services are competent, but they're investigating based on assumptions that don't account for human involvement. They keep looking for established rivals rather than primitive newcomers." Marcus smiled grimly. "Then we'd better be ready for their attention when they finally figure it out. Is the defensive network prepared for coordinated assault?" Zethkar's assessment was thoroughly optimistic. The months of preparation had transformed human colonies throughout the sector into interlocking fortresses capable of mutual support across interstellar distances. More importantly, dozens of other species had requested human tactical assistance in preparing their own defenses, creating a coalition that could coordinate resistance to Kethran expansion. The Empire no longer faces scattered opponents fighting according to predictable patterns, he reported. They face an alliance of species that have learned to fight like humans, with intelligence, coordination, and absolute determination to resist Imperial domination. The transformation was complete. What had begun as an assassination contract had evolved into a galactic revolution that would reshape interstellar politics for generations. And at the center of it all were humans, the supposedly primitive species that had proven intelligence and determination could overcome any physical disadvantage. But Zethkar knew the final confrontation was still to come. The Kethran Empire would not collapse without a decisive battle that would determine whether their traditional approach to warfare could survive in a galaxy where humans had taught everyone to fight differently. The Kethran Imperial fleet arrived at Zirion. 6 weeks later, in a display of overwhelming force designed to intimidate any opposition into immediate surrender. 200 warships arranged themselves in perfect battle formation around the mining colony, their weapons systems armed, and targeting solutions locked onto every structure on the planetary surface. The fleet's commander, War Marshal Thekvar, broadcast surrender demands with the absolute confidence of someone who had never faced serious resistance to Imperial authority. Zethkar watched the display from the command center that had been carved deep beneath Zirion 7's surface during months of defensive preparations. Banks of sensors and communication arrays tracked every ship in the Imperial formation, identifying weapon signatures, defensive configurations, and tactical dispositions with precision that would have impressed the galaxy's most advanced military forces. The humans had not merely prepared to resist Imperial assault. They had prepared to turn the Kethrans' strength against them. Impressive formation, Marcus Chon observed with professional detachment as he studied the tactical displays. Textbook Imperial Doctrine. Overwhelming firepower concentrated in mutually supporting positions designed to prevent enemy forces from achieving local superiority at any point. It's also exactly what we expected, Sarah Martinez added from her position at the intelligence console. Kethran military doctrine hasn't changed significantly in 2 centuries. They rely on proven approaches because those approaches have always worked against conventional opponents. Zethkar found himself simultaneously awed by the Imperial fleet's destructive potential and confident in the defensive preparations that surrounded him. The humans had spent months studying Kethran tactics, identifying patterns and predictable responses that could be exploited by opponents willing to fight unconventionally. What looked like an overwhelming display of superior force was actually a formation optimized for fighting enemies who would respond predictably to intimidation and direct confrontation. "How many ships do we actually face?" he asked, noting that sensor readings suggested the Imperial formation was not as solid as it appeared. "About 60 actual combat vessels," Marcus replied after reviewing detailed scans. "The rest are support ships, transports, and mobile command platforms positioned to create the illusion of greater strength. Standard Imperial psychological warfare. Make the opposition believe they face impossible odds, so they surrender without fighting." "Unfortunately for them," Sarah said with satisfaction, "humans have been dealing with impossible odds since we left our homeworld. We don't surrender just because something looks difficult." The first phase of the battle began exactly as human planning had anticipated. War Marshal Thekvar, frustrated by the colony's failure to respond to his surrender demands, ordered a demonstration bombardment designed to destroy several outlying structures and convince the defenders that resistance was futile. The orbital strike was precisely calibrated to cause spectacular destruction while leaving the colony's primary installations intact for future Imperial use. The energy beams that lanced down from orbit struck their targets with devastating accuracy, vaporizing storage facilities and mining equipment in brilliant flashes that could be seen across the planetary surface. Any conventional defensive force would have been demoralized by the display of superior firepower and the obvious futility of resistance against such overwhelming technological advantage. Instead, the colony's response systems activated with mechanical precision that spoke to extensive preparation and rehearsal. Hidden weapon emplacements emerged from concealed positions throughout the mining complex, their targeting systems already locked onto specific ships in the Imperial formation. The return fire was not designed to match the Kethran bombardment in raw destructive power. Instead, it exploited vulnerabilities that human intelligence had identified in Imperial ship designs. The first volley crippled 3 Kethran destroyers and severely damaged 2 heavy cruisers, achieving damage ratios that should have been impossible for a planetary defense system facing a fleet-scale assault. The weapons were precisely targeted at power distribution nodes, shield generators, and weapon systems that Kethran engineers had never imagined enemies would be capable of identifying and striking with such accuracy. War Marshal Thekvar's confusion was evident in the increasingly frantic communications his fleet transmitted as they attempted to understand how a primitive mining colony had achieved such devastating tactical success. Imperial doctrine provided no framework for interpreting losses that exceeded their own inflicted damage, nor for responding to defensive systems that seemed to anticipate their every move. Phase 1 complete. Marcus announced as the colonial defense grid ceased firing and withdrew to concealed positions. Imperial fleet is confused, partially damaged, and positioned exactly where we want them. Beginning Phase 2, Sarah confirmed, activating communication arrays that had remained silent throughout the initial engagement. Zethkar watched in fascination as the tactical situation transformed completely within minutes. The apparently isolated mining colony revealed itself as the center of a defensive network that spanned multiple star systems, with human forces and allied species coordinating responses across interstellar distances. Ships that had appeared on long-range sensors as routine merchant traffic suddenly revealed themselves as military vessels armed with human-derived weapons and tactical systems. The Kethran fleet found itself surrounded by opponents who had spent months studying Imperial weaknesses and developing specific countermeasures for every aspect of their military doctrine. Instead of facing a single isolated target, War Marshal Thekvar confronted a coordinated alliance that outnumbered his forces and possessed tactical advantages his training had never prepared him to counter. "This is impossible," came the War Marshal's transmitted communication to his fleet commanders, the universal translator rendering his shock and disbelief clearly. How did primitive species acquire such capabilities? Where did they obtain weapons that can penetrate our defensive systems? Marcus Chin's response was broadcast on frequencies the entire Imperial fleet could receive, his voice calm and professional despite the chaos erupting around the Kethran formation. "War Marshal Thekvar, this is Colonel Marcus Chun, Human Colonial Defense Force. Your empire's expansion ends here. You are outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and fighting opponents who understand your tactics better than you understand ours. I am authorized to accept your surrender and guarantee safe passage out of this system for any ships that withdraw immediately." The offer of mercy was strategically calculated to divide the Imperial fleet between commanders willing to accept retreat and those whose pride demanded continued resistance. Kethran military culture valued honor above survival, but it also recognized the practical necessity of preserving forces for future campaigns. The choice between death and strategic withdrawal would fracture Imperial unity at the moment when coordination was most essential for survival. Zethkar observed the Imperial fleet's response with professional admiration for human psychological warfare techniques. Rather than attempting to destroy their enemies immediately, the humans were offering them opportunities to preserve their lives and honor while abandoning their aggressive intentions. Some Kethran commanders would accept such offers as militarily sensible, while others would view them as insults that demanded violent response. The Imperial formation began to fragment as individual commanders made independent decisions about continuing the assault or preserving their ships for future operations. Nearly a third of the fleet withdrew to minimum safe distance, their commanders choosing tactical retreat over probable destruction in a battle they no longer understood. The remaining vessels attempted to maintain formation and continue their attack, but their coordination was fatally compromised by the loss of mutual support and unified command structure. Phase 3, Sarah announced as sensor readings confirmed the division within Imperial ranks. The human counterattack began with surgical precision that demonstrated months of tactical planning and intelligence gathering. Instead of attempting to match Kethran firepower directly, Allied forces exploited the gaps in Imperial formation created by withdrawing ships. They used mobility and coordination to achieve local superiority at specific points, concentrating overwhelming force against isolated targets before shifting to new objectives faster than Imperial responses could counter. Zethkar watched Kethran heavy cruisers, ships that had been the backbone of Imperial expansion for generations, destroyed by coordinated attacks from forces they had previously dismissed as technologically inferior. The weapons systems that had made the Empire invincible against conventional opponents proved inadequate against enemies who refused to fight conventionally. More importantly, the tactical approaches that had served the Kethran throughout their expansion campaigns became liabilities when facing opponents who anticipated and countered every predictable response. Imperial commanders found their standard maneuvers anticipated, their formations targeted at vulnerable points, their communications intercepted, and used to coordinate attacks against them. Your people are genuinely terrifying in battle, Zethkar observed as he watched human forces coordinate attacks with a dozen allied species across multiple engagement zones simultaneously. Not because of individual capabilities, but because you make war itself change to serve your purposes. That's the secret, Marcus replied without taking his attention from the tactical displays. We don't just adapt to circumstances. We create circumstances that favor our approaches while disadvantaging our opponents. The Kethran are fighting the battle they prepared for, but it's not the battle that's actually happening. The psychological impact of human tactics was as devastating as their physical effects. Kethran commanders had built their careers on the assumption that superior technology and overwhelming force would always prevail against numerically inferior opponents. Facing enemies who turned those advantages into vulnerabilities created cognitive dissonance that paralyzed their decision-making processes. War Marshal Thekvar's communications became increasingly desperate as he attempted to rally his remaining forces against opponents who seemed to anticipate his every command. Imperial doctrine provided no guidance for situations where technological superiority failed to translate into tactical advantage, leaving him without frameworks for understanding or responding to the unfolding disaster. All units, concentrate fire on the planetary surface, he finally ordered in desperation. Destroy the colony completely and eliminate the source of resistance coordination. The order represented the final abandonment of Imperial strategic objectives in favor of simple destruction, exactly the response human planners had anticipated and prepared to counter. As Kethran ships turned their weapons toward Zirian 7's surface, they exposed themselves to coordinated attacks from Allied forces that had positioned themselves to exploit precisely such tactical desperation. The result was catastrophic for Imperial forces. Ships that had survived the initial engagements were systematically destroyed as they attempted to execute bombardment runs against hardened defensive positions. The colony's surface installations, built to withstand sustained orbital assault, absorbed the Imperial bombardment, while Allied forces eliminated the ships conducting it. Phase 4, Sarah announced as the last Kethran attack ships were neutralized. The final phase of the battle focused not on destruction, but on capture and intelligence gathering. Human forces and their allies moved to disable rather than destroy the remaining Imperial vessels, seeking to preserve as much technology and personnel as possible for strategic exploitation. The goal was not merely to defeat this particular Imperial fleet, but to gather intelligence that would support broader resistance to Kethran expansion throughout the galaxy. Zethkar participated directly in the boarding actions that secured several damaged Kethran vessels, using his combat experience and knowledge of alien physiology to help human Marines navigate the internal layouts of Imperial ships. The assault techniques he had learned during his training proved devastatingly effective against opponents who had never faced enemies capable of exploiting their species' physiological and psychological vulnerabilities. The Kethran defenders fought with courage born of desperation, but their training had not prepared them for opponents who combined human tactical innovation with detailed knowledge of their weaknesses. Zethkar found himself working seamlessly with human soldiers whose approaches complemented his own capabilities while covering his limitations. Boarding successful, he reported as his team secured the bridge of a Kethran heavy cruiser. Intelligence files intact, crew secured, vessel ready for detailed examination. Outstanding work, Marcus replied through the communication system. Intelligence teams are en route to begin data extraction. Your performance exceeded all expectations. The acknowledgement carried personal satisfaction that surprised Zethkar with its intensity. Throughout his mercenary career, he had taken pride in professional competence and individual achievement. Working as part of a coordinated team toward strategic objectives that extended beyond immediate personal gain provided a different kind of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. The battle's aftermath revealed the complete scope of human strategic planning and its implications for galactic politics. The Kethran Imperial fleet had been systematically dismantled by opponents they had dismissed as primitive and technologically inferior. More importantly, detailed recordings of the engagement would demonstrate to every species in the galaxy that Imperial military supremacy was no longer inevitable or insurmountable. War Marshal Thekvar was among the prisoners taken during the final boarding actions, his flagship disabled and captured with its command crew intact. His interrogation revealed the extent to which the Kethran Empire had underestimated human capabilities and the strategic threat represented by their tactical innovations. We believe you were weak because you lacked natural weapons and armor, he admitted during questioning, his translator rendering his defeat and bewilderment clearly. Our intelligence services reported that humans could be intimidated into submission through displays of superior force. Your intelligence services were partially correct, Marcus replied thoughtfully. Humans can be intimidated, and we do respect superior force when we encounter it. But you made the mistake of believing that fear would make us surrender rather than inspiring us to become more dangerous. Sarah added her own perspective to the discussion. Human military doctrine assumes that any opponent can be defeated through sufficient preparation, intelligence, and tactical innovation. The Kethran Empire became our opponent the moment you decided to eliminate our colonies. Everything that followed was the inevitable result of that decision. The strategic implications of the Kethran defeat spread throughout the galaxy with unprecedented speed. Species that had accepted imperial domination as inevitable began reconsidering their positions, while others actively sought human assistance in developing their own defensive capabilities. The tactical intelligence that Zethkar had distributed through mercenary networks became the foundation for resistance movements across dozens of star systems. Within months, the Kethran Empire faced simultaneous rebellions and defensive actions across the majority of their territorial holdings. Their military forces, trained for conventional warfare against predictable opponents, proved incapable of countering the human-derived tactics that had spread throughout their sphere of influence. Imperial expansion halted completely as available forces were redirected to contain domestic threats. The Empire will survive, Zethkar observed during a strategic assessment conducted 6 months after the Battle of Zirion 7. But it will never again expand through simple intimidation and technological superiority. The galaxy has learned that such advantages can be overcome through intelligence and determination. That was always the goal, Marcus confirmed. Not to destroy the Kethran, but to establish that no single species or empire can dominate others simply through superior force. The galaxy is big enough for everyone if we all respect each other's right to exist. The transformation in Zethkar's own circumstances reflected the broader changes reshaping galactic society. His reputation as an independent assassin had been replaced by recognition as a tactical consultant and military advisor whose unique combination of combat experience and human training made him valuable to species throughout the galaxy. Rather than hunting individuals for personal profit, he now helped entire civilizations develop defensive capabilities and strategic thinking that could preserve their independence. I am no longer the galaxy's deadliest alien mercenary, he mused during a private conversation with Sarah Martinez. That title belongs to creatures who still believe that individual violence can solve strategic problems. You've become something more important, she replied. You've become someone who helps others become stronger rather than simply eliminating threats through violence. That's a form of strength that exceeds anything you could achieve alone. The recognition carried profound personal satisfaction. Throughout his mercenary career, Zethkar had measured success through kill counts and individual achievements that demonstrated his superiority over competitors. Working with humans had taught him to value collective accomplishments and strategic objectives that extended beyond immediate personal gain. More importantly, he had learned to appreciate the human approach to conflict that emphasized intelligence over strength, adaptation over tradition, and cooperation over domination. These principles had not only made him more effective in his new role, but had provided a framework for understanding his place in a rapidly changing galaxy. What happens now? He asked, genuinely curious about future developments. Marcus Chin's answer reflected the ambitious scope of human strategic thinking. We continue building alliances, sharing knowledge, and ensuring that no single entity can threaten galactic stability through military supremacy. The universe is full of wonders that we've barely begun to explore. It would be tragic to waste time fighting over resources and territory when we could be working together to understand what's out there. The vision was simultaneously modest and revolutionary. Rather than seeking to replace Kethran dominance with human supremacy, the humans were proposing a galaxy where military strength served defensive rather than aggressive purposes. It was an approach that would require fundamental changes in how most species thought about power, security, and interstellar relations. And if other species refused to accept such cooperation, Zethkar asked. Sarah's smile carried the same confidence he had first encountered during their initial confrontation. Then, they'll discover why you should never enrage a human. We're perfectly willing to coexist peacefully with anyone who reciprocates that intention. But we're equally prepared to defend ourselves and our allies against anyone who chooses aggression over cooperation. The threat was delivered with matter-of-fact certainty that carried more weight than any display of weapons or technology could have provided. Zethkar had experienced firsthand the effectiveness of human military capabilities when properly motivated and coordinated. Any species choosing to challenge human defensive preparations would face opponents who had proven their ability to turn superior force into catastrophic liability. Years later, as Zethkar traveled between star systems providing tactical consultation to species seeking to strengthen their defensive capabilities, he often reflected on the transformation that had begun with a simple assassination contract. The galaxy was fundamentally different than it had been when he first accepted the mission to eliminate Marcus Chun. More complex, more dangerous for aggressors, but infinitely more secure for those willing to cooperate rather than dominate. The change had been orchestrated by a species that most of the galaxy had dismissed as primitive and non-threatening. Humans had proven that intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking could overcome any advantage that evolution or technology could provide. They had also demonstrated that the most effective form of strength was the ability to make others stronger rather than simply destroying opposition. The lesson was one that Zethkar carried with him throughout his new career. Never underestimate opponents who fight like prey animals, because prey animals that refuse to accept their position in the food chain become the most dangerous predators of all. And humans had spent their entire evolutionary history refusing to accept that anything was strong enough to hunt them successfully. The galaxy was a safer place because of that refusal. Even if many species would never fully understand why they should be grateful that someone had finally taught the universe's apex predators to fear the consequences of their own aggression. But Zethkar understood, and that understanding had transformed him from a weapon into a protector, perhaps the most profound change that any warrior could experience. In the end, the title of Galaxy's Deadliest Alien Mercenary had become meaningless in a universe where the truly dangerous individuals were those who helped others become strong enough to defend themselves. And that, Zethkar reflected with deep satisfaction, was exactly the kind of galaxy worth fighting to preserve.